Nearly $1.1 billion moved through one man's bank account. And for years, someone in Washington has been fighting to keep the paperwork locked away. Think about that for a second. Almost $1 billion quietly sliding across international borders, hidden inside thousands of wire transfers. And every time Congress asks to see the full file, a door slams shut. Why? What could be buried inside those pages that is so sensitive, so explosive, that even senior investigators are being pushed back with a polite move along? When a financial trail is this massive, this detailed, and this unexplained, it usually means one thing. Someone, somewhere, doesn't want the truth coming out.
Just one of Mr. Epstein's bank accounts. If you ask me, that is more than 4,000 potential lines of investigation right there. Hundreds of millions more flowed through other accounts. That's even a lot more to investigate. The file shows that Mr. Epstein used multiple Russian banks, which are now under sanctions, to process payments related to sex trafficking. A lot of the women and girls he targeted came from Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and elsewhere. One shudders to think about the kinds of people who must have been involved in trafficking these women and young girls out of those companies and into the Epstein web of abuse. Again, these are all potential leads, Mr. President, the Department of Justice ought to be digging into. This is about years and years of international sex trafficking. None of this is a hoax. None of it is a scam. And I'd like to say I consider it insulting to the intelligence of the American people for the Trump administration to simply say there is nothing to investigate here. Now, when the Trump administration came in with a lot of fanfare about transparency and openness, I said, I'm going to follow up on that. So I wrote to the Attorney General, Ms. Bondi, Treasury Secretary Bessent, FBI Director Patel, and I asked them all to produce the Epstein file to the Senate Finance Committee so it could be reviewed. In fact, I've made that request multiple times. The Trump commitment to transparency based on the response didn't mean a whole lot because they just refused. Here's what one Treasury official wrote back to me. I'll quote here. The Department of Treasury has previously made documents available relating to the matter in response to your inquiries. Accordingly, we understand that you have the information you seek from the Treasury related to this request. We thank you for your attention to this important issue. Mr. President, for anybody who's familiar with how these discussions go in Washington, D.C., what I just read was code for the bureaucracy saying, you're asking for information, go pound sand. The Trump administration may be trying to close the books on the Epstein sex trafficking, but I want it understood as a senior member of the Senate Finance Committee, where we spend a lot of time looking at where substantial sums of money are going, particularly if they may be promoting wrongdoing and helping to evade taxes. We are going to stay on this fight to hold the wealthy individuals accountable for the harm that they clearly were involved in injuring the young women and others in this sex trafficking. So I'm going to have more follow-up for Attorney General Bondi very quickly. As for today, Mr. President, if she doesn't want to do the investigating, doesn't want the DOJ to do it, let me just restate my original demand. Have that Treasury information given to the Senate Finance Committee and have us on a bipartisan basis do our work. That's what we do in important investigations. If the Trump people believe they need additional authority to carry out the requests that I make again this afternoon, let me offer to help them write the bill myself. The idea that there is nothing more to investigate, not when you have 4,000 wire transfers, many of them associated with the possibility of wrongdoing and sex traffic promoting. The idea that you have that and there's nothing to investigate when it comes to the Epstein sex trafficking operation is ridiculous. Pam Bondi was the Attorney General in the state of Florida, where a lot of the Epstein crimes were committed. The Attorney General ought to know better, of all people. Mr. President, I can't begin to understand the President's handling of this or why he thinks this is just going to go away. But I'm here to say that our investigators have spent 3 full years looking into this. And the reason why is because we feel so strongly about the horror of sex trafficking and our commitment to root it out. The President of the Senate is new to this body, but I'm sure he's dealt with these issues before. You can't have a much bigger horror in front of you than sex trafficking abuse. So we're talking about real evil done to women and girls by Jeffrey Epstein. And Mr. President, nobody gets to sweep that under the rug. I yield the floor.
And the strangest part is, this isn't speculation. This isn't rumor. This comes straight from the officials who tried to open the file themselves, only to be told the cabinet drawer holding those documents might as well be sealed in concrete. So today, we're going to talk about what's inside that file, why certain people fought so hard to hide it, and why one senator just publicly blew the lid off the whole thing. The story begins with a discovery that stunned investigators: a single Epstein-controlled bank account holding 4,725 wire transfers totaling nearly $1.1 billion. You don't move that kind of money by accident. You don't process thousands of transfers without leaving fingerprints. Each one is a breadcrumb, leading to people, companies, banks, enablers, and possibly entire networks operating in the shadows. And yet, for years, those breadcrumbs were locked away, tucked into a Treasury Department file no one outside a handful of officials was allowed to fully see. When investigators were finally permitted to review small portions of it, what they found raised even more questions. Because mixed into those billions were transactions routed through multiple foreign banks, including several in Russia that are now under sanctions. Transfers connected to places where Epstein allegedly targeted women and girls. Transfers that don't just hint at wrongdoing. They scream for investigation. But instead of chasing those leads, someone in power decided the matter was closed. End of discussion. No further transparency required. Which makes zero sense. Because if someone really wanted justice, these files are a gold mine. So why bury them? That question only grew louder when the officials who promised openness reversed course. When a new administration came in, its leaders talked endlessly about transparency, about exposing everything, about shining a light on the darkest corners of this case. But almost overnight, the tone changed. Suddenly, the message became, nothing to see here, nothing left to investigate. Move on. That shift isn't normal. It doesn't happen without pressure. It doesn't happen unless revealing the truth creates problems for powerful people. What makes this even stranger is that this wasn't just a quiet shift. It was abrupt, public, and it contradicted years of earlier statements about uncovering the full scope of Epstein's financial network. The people who once demanded every detail be released were now insisting the files be kept sealed. And when Congress asked for answers, they didn't get explanations. They got stone walls. One of the clearest examples came in the form of a letter from the Treasury Department. A letter that, on its surface, looked polite and formal, but anyone who understands Washington knows exactly what it meant. It said, in essence, You already have what you need. Which wasn't true. Not even close. Investigators had only seen portions of the file. Huge sections remained off-limits. And the message they received wasn't an invitation to collaborate. It was a dismissal. A coded way of saying, go pound sand. The senator who received that letter knew it instantly. Congress was being brushed off. Not because the file was irrelevant, but because someone didn't want fresh eyes on those transactions. And why would they? Nearly $1 billion flowing in and out of one account opens up thousands of new investigative paths. It exposes who was paying, who was receiving, and who helped make the transfers possible. If even one of those paths leads to a person with influence, with power, with connections, releasing the full file could blow open a scandal far larger than what the public has already seen. And here's where things get even more intriguing. Observers online, analysts, and investigative reporters have all speculated, carefully, that the secrecy isn't about protecting Epstein. It's about shielding others. Nothing is proven. But the pattern raises real questions that a major part of this puzzle leads back to Florida, the state where many of Epstein's earliest crimes occurred. During that period, the state's top law enforcement official was Bondi, someone who knew exactly how serious these allegations were. Someone who, of all people, should have demanded full transparency from the moment the case resurfaced. Yet in her later role inside the federal justice system, she oversaw decisions that blocked investigators from viewing the complete Treasury records, the same records containing thousands of financial transactions tied to suspected trafficking. That contradiction hasn't gone unnoticed. Some have wondered whether political pressures played a role. Others believe the hesitation was driven by concerns over what names or institutions might appear in the file. Again, speculation, not proof. But when patterns repeat themselves, people ask questions. Why would an official who once held authority in a state impacted by Epstein's actions pull back when given a chance to reveal the truth? Why protect a system that allowed such abuse to flourish? And what exactly was so sensitive in those documents that transparency suddenly became inconvenient? While the agencies circled their wagons, one lawmaker refused to drop the matter. Senator Wyden, a senior member of the committee responsible for tracking financial crime, spent 3 years pushing for full access to the file. 3 years of letters, hearings, requests, and follow-ups, all ignored or dismissed. That is not normal. When a senator demands financial records tied to potential trafficking, federal agencies typically respond quickly. But in this case, the wall only grew taller. Wyden eventually said publicly what many suspected privately. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't an oversight. It was stonewalling. He argued that the Treasury files contained thousands of investigative leads, each one potentially uncovering an enabler, a trafficker, a financial facilitator, or an institution that looked the other way. And while agencies claimed they didn't need to investigate further, Wyden argued the exact opposite, that refusing to follow the money was a failure of duty. So he took a bold step. He offered to write legislation forcing the release of the full file. If the agencies wouldn't cooperate voluntarily, Congress would compel them. That kind of move is rare, and it only happens when the stakes are extremely high. The reason Wyden fought so hard is simple. Financial trails do not lie. They reveal networks, not rumors. They connect the dots between victims, traffickers, enablers, and institutions. Behind each wire transfer is a real person, a real life, a real moment of exploitation that needs answers. These aren't abstract numbers on a spreadsheet. They're evidence. Evidence that should have been investigated years ago. When thousands of international transfers tie back to a man already known for targeting young women, you don't close the case. You expand it. But instead of expanding anything, key officials insisted the matter was finished. They ignored the foreign banks involved. They ignored the international patterns. They ignored the volume of transactions that practically begged investigators to dig deeper. And that's why Wyden's voice cracked through the Senate chamber. Because closing the door on this case doesn't just hide numbers, it hides people. It hides the truth about how a financier built a global operation that exploited vulnerable girls from places like Russia, Belarus, Turkey, and beyond. No graphic details are needed to understand the gravity. It was systemic. It was international. And someone helped make it happen. Which brings us to the core question. One the public keeps asking, one investigators keep circling, and one the agencies refuse to answer. What are they afraid you'll see? Because once those Treasury records are released, everything changes. We will finally see who sent money, who received it, who helped move it, and which institutions facilitated transactions that should have triggered alarms. These documents could reveal patterns that point to enablers who never faced accountability. They could expose networks that weren't dismantled. They could show how many people benefited financially from Epstein's operation and how far the connections reached. For years, people have speculated about those names, speculated about the favors, the deals, the secrets that might lie beneath the surface. Nothing is confirmed, but the fact that agencies fought so hard to keep the files sealed only fuels suspicion. If there was truly nothing left to investigate, why not release everything and silence the questions? Why issue dismissive letters instead of cooperating? Why pretend a billion-dollar trail is meaningless? Silence isn't reassurance. It's a warning. What makes this even more unsettling is that Wyden isn't speaking from emotion. He's speaking from evidence. His team spent years reviewing what little they were allowed to access. He saw enough to know the full file could shift the narrative completely. And he made it clear, no one gets to sweep this under the rug. Not agencies, not officials, not bureaucrats hiding behind formal letters. Because this isn't about politics. It isn't about headlines. It's about accountability. The survivors deserve the truth. The public deserves transparency. And the financial records sitting in that cabinet drawer hold answers that could reshape everything we know about the Epstein operation. Whether those answers point to institutions, individuals, foreign brokers, or domestic enablers, the truth matters. And until Congress gains full access, the story remains incomplete. So here's the reality. Nearly $1.1 billion flowed through one account. Thousands of transfers, multiple countries, sanctioned banks, international trafficking routes, and a coordinated refusal to let investigators dig into the details. If that doesn't raise questions, nothing will. The secrecy surrounding these files isn't just unusual, it's unprecedented. And the longer they remain locked away, the more people wonder what's inside. Because files like these don't stay sealed forever. Eventually, someone talks, someone leaks, someone pushes hard enough to break the wall. And when that day comes, the names, the connections, and the full map of Epstein's financial world will finally be exposed. If you want to stay ahead of that moment, if you want to understand how power, secrecy, and money shaped one of the most disturbing cases in modern history, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and stay tuned. More revelations are coming, and you won't want to miss what gets uncovered next.